G'day Internet, welcome back to another video. Now, excuse the mess, I'm in the middle of another job. Anyway, weekend just been, there was an event in Sydney, in Croydon specifically, called March of the Microbee to celebrate the Microbee's 40th birthday, and it was hosted by the Australian Computer Museum Society. So myself and another local collector, Keith, decided to hit the road and make the event. Now the event didn't start till 11, but it still required us getting up at some ungodly hour and hitting the Hume Highway for the incredibly boring drive north. Now we did manage to get there in time, which gave us a bit of a chance to poke around some of the displays that the museum has on. But for me at least, one of the biggest highlights was finally getting to meet a bunch of people that I only know through the Australian Vintage Computer Group and the ACMS. So before we get any further, it was fantastic to finally meet Ewan from Microbee in the flesh, Alan Lawton, our resident archivist, who's the one who actually gave me the prem that you saw in the previous video. And I also got to meet both Adrian and Riley from the ACMS, so all of that was fantastic. Now, obviously there was a whole heap of Microbees on display, and you can take a bit of a look at them now. There was also some really special machines. The Gamma, which is a rather odd machine that there was only about 20 of them made in the end, but it runs two Z80s and a 68010. Finally, Ewan was able to show off his latest project, which is essentially a brand new Microbee. Yeah, there's bits of FPGA in there and so forth, but it also offers a whole bunch of expansion, and it's got an inbuilt disk drive, so it can do all the Microbee kind of stuff, but it's got an interface so he can eventually drop in a 68010 to replicate the Gamma. I think that's the idea at least. So I'm really looking forward to that coming onto the market. But I think for most people though, the biggest highlight was that in attendance was Owen Hill, the founder of Applied Technology, which is the company that turned into Microbee. And as much as he was apologetic the whole way through of kind of just what he called rambling on, the rest of us just loved being able to ask him questions and listen to his stories. And after the credits, you'll be able to, I'll put everything from Owen that I managed to record. Apologies in advance, the audio is a little bit rubbish and I've had to play around with it a bit because for reasons. Once all the formalities were out of the way, I actually managed to stick myself, I was supervised, behind the curtain to check out some of the storage of the ACMS. Now, I should make it very, very clear that the Museum Society has literally only just moved into this premises. So right now, everything is just simply stacked on massive shelves. But if you know anything about the history of the Museum Society, you'll know that this is actually a vast improvement of where they were a few years ago. But in the end, I had an absolutely fantastic day. We all got back here at about, I think it was about 5:30 or 6 o'clock by the time we got back to Canberra, but it was absolutely worthwhile. So a massive, massive shout out to the ACMS for organising it, to Ewan and Alan who came all the way up from Melbourne, and to everyone who attended that made it a very, very special event. I'll put links to ACMS and Microbee and everyone else down in the description. But until then, I'll see you in the next one. How did it come about in the first place? How did you end up designing a computer
you know.
I'll take it on board if you like. Sup it, mate. Flight technology that I'd started was we actually it's called the electronic mailbox briefly, and I was just selling bits, transistors and things like that. Then I realised that it was bloody hard. You had to buy everything in case someone wanted to order them. So I then designed kits like the hi-fi amplifier or a FM, and so we started making kits. But that was the business. You wrote an article in a magazine, hero stuff, and all the checks came in matching that kit. It was much easier to buy the bits. But then the S100 and the kit computers came out. So the US was the Altair, really brought it out with all in kit form. So we all started selling computer kits to hobbyists. The one that stuffed everything was Tandy, because suddenly you had this made-up computer, and very quickly Apple came out. I was actually in the US once, and someone said we're entering a brand new chapter in this industry. It's chapter 11. Every one of us was making kits, and we had to get our act together quickly and make them. So the Microbee then was, I'd planned to sell 1,000. I think it was something of that order in the first year. That would be our sort of expected sales volume. But then I said, we've got to get our act together, guys. So Dick had, if I'm adding too much detail, I'll try to put a bit to it. Dick had a, sorry Dick, it doesn't work coupon. So we sold our kits with a no apologies. He said $50 and a bag of bits back, and we'll fix it for you or assemble it, whatever you wanted to do. And so we used those 1,000 as a 1,000 monkeys test. People put them together, ran into problems. That was the basis of our manufacturing. We had to end up that way. I had no idea how to finance it, because suddenly with kits is easy. You send your check in the mail and I thank you very much and I send the bits to you when I've got them. Suddenly when you're manufacturing something, it's got to work by the time it arrives on your letterbox. So that's how it was coming about. Actually, Matthew Starr's father is a doctor at the time. How the hell are you going? I don't know. But then I had a bright idea. I'm sorry if I'm giving too much detail, but just want to put a bit of flesh on your answer. That we're always going to injection mould the case. We knew we had to do that. So I had a packaging company make the vacuum moulded one. There was one around yesterday, and that for the first 1,000. But I had all the drawings made for the injection moulded one as well. So we then offered a $25 upgrade kit for the 1,000 of them, because the tooling cost me $25,000. So it didn't do well at school, but I thought I could see that number gelling. So that's how we financed it. People paid us for the conversion, and we really got into this being supportive. You could buy your one and upgrade it, and it worked very well. I think people really liked the idea of being able to, they weren't stuck. Sorry you bought yesterday's model, you should see what your friends are just buying today. Everyone could get one, and that's how it started. I hope it made sense. So from the very early, and I put a bit of flesh on that, if you think the transistor came out, then the integrated circuit, and when we came to the microprocessor, all these salesmen came from the US with these development boards, whatever they were, and of course you then had to go and buy a teletype, bloody big machine, a few around somewhere here, and that's how the VDU market came in. The magazine started making things that you could actually, cheaper than a big teletype, because the US had them everywhere in disposal stores, and there weren't many around Australia. So that's how the kit market came, and I hope it makes sense then that it was bloody Apple and Tandy that forced us to make the Microbee. And we called it the Granny Smith, Australia's Apple. That was our code name for it while we were making it, So there was I had a lot of fun.
How is it that you ended up choosing a Z80 chip? Was that sort of just a random
That was the state of the art. The 8080, or 008 I recall, 4004 before that, I think, where the museum was using that before, but and then 8080 was the neatest one you could do. So I went to the US and saw Gary Kildall and got CPM, and we wrote BASIC for it, which were the two operating systems, if you like. So, that was about, it's funny, I went into Monterey and he didn't give a damn about it. He didn't even know where Australia was, I don't think. But we got a licence, or there was Dave Grippus who told me I had to go and do that.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, he was the progenitor, I think, to the Microbee was the S100 systems. And that's how I first got into applied technology and then Microbee was I started off on a 2650 system, which some of you might remember, which came out in Electronics Australia in '78. But then very quickly the system to have was the DGZ80, S100 system that came out in ETI, and that's the original, one of the original ETI boards that I managed to acquire not so recently, quite recently. And with that, of course, as Owen said, you need a VDU. That's the MW640, which was Applied Technologies derivative of the original design. There was the DG640, which had the 2102 RAM chips. This one's got the 211.4s and a lot of bits and pieces. But those two, together with a RAM card, that was sort of like the basis of your S100 system. And if you look at the architecture, the way the VDU is mapped and the way the Z80 is mapped, you can definitely see that's where the Microbee came from. The memory map, the VDU goes to the same place.
That 100-pin bus.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, computer talk. Yeah,
Yeah.
sounds great. Yeah.
Exactly. And the monitor, the DDoS monitor that came in is almost identical to the monitor that you get on the Microbee, the EEPROM monitor. So this is really the ancestor of the Microbee. And then Owen came along and put it all into a nice package with a nice VDU that could do 80 columns and all the rest of the stuff that this couldn't do. But
So you
yeah.
kind of had the idea that you'd run a CPM on it, something like that.
That was
Yeah.
our
all
goal.
the systems back then ran CPM,
Yeah,
didn't they?
it was even IBM.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. They started off.
Uh-huh.
But give it a side, not an answer to your own question, but proudly we say it's an Australian computer. Craig remembered the Microbee factory had they just poured concrete with cheap workstations all along, but painted blue because I'd seen Ben Casey on TV. Blue goes really well on camera, so we had a blue floor, but it had a mezzanine floor going along one side, and the offices are upstairs, open plan on it because it saved money.
Yep.
So those that thought they were running a business were upstairs, and the slaves were downstairs. And we had the late Senator Button came to the factory once, and it was really interesting. That where Microbee was Henry Kendall bellbirds. You could hear bellbirds on the more Australiana than you. And Button's walking along, and I said, "But sir, it's not really an Australian computer. We bring all the bits in. These guys down here assemble it in an hour, and the computer goes out there." And he said, never on public, I know, but I've never seen Australians work that hard for an hour. He was our industry minister. So, a one-liner from history, if you like, I've never seen Australians work that hard for an hour. And there was a spirit in that everyone making them was an enormous pride. So it's not adding quite your question, but yes, we really had to manufacture, and a lot of it, like Craig, had hobbies as well. So a lot of people came in from the hobby market. And then put him together, there was just, it wasn't worker grade 1, 2 or 3, they were just Microbee team. And everyone honed in, We had one of the problems, I think the Japanese say, if you see a lot of inventory lying around the floor, that factory's got problems. And we had a backlog going a mile long, and heaps of half-finished Microbees everywhere. You see the disaster. So I called everyone and said, well, look, we've got a Christmas bonus coming. The shops are desperate to sell these, so I've got a Christmas bonus for everyone. It's $1 for every computer that goes out from now till Christmas, and that's my bonus. The cleaning ladies, everyone's Christmas bonus. Oh my God, they cleaned that floor, and we got $300 each for Christmas. But there was 300 more computers left at the factory. It was a fun gesture, if you like, but it sort of, the spirit was there. I'd like to put that. Well, Craig would probably relate.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was everybody mucked in, and I started off as a working in part time in the shop in Waitara, as a lot of people did, and Owen took me on as an engineer working up in Gosford. And I worked with Max Morn, who was one of the technicians there. A lot of you would have seen the technical manuals if you've been involved in the Microbee stuff. I worked there, and there was talking about the levels. There was the office level up the top, which ran next to the wall, and there was the production level underneath. But there was the dungeon down the bottom, which was almost underground. And Max and I and some of the other guys, we worked down in the dungeon. it was Max and me and Gordon and the documentation
Sharon.
guys were down there. Sharon and Anne.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And remember, was it Janine who used to do the?
Yes, yeah.
Who used to do all the printed circuit boards
Yes,
with
yeah.
the old lead cassette layouts. She was an absolute whiz at doing those. And we all worked down there. And but yeah, we'd often be up on the production floor helping out, or trying to find problems. And yeah, it was great. Yeah.
I'll give you one I mentioned yesterday. That, on our screens you'll see sometimes a whole lot of icons sitting above, particularly on the disk drive. You got one? Yeah. What happened was that we had, actually his name now, and it was Bob O'Reilly, which is one of Bill Gates' personal friends, but he's running the English side of the England Microsoft. And he came to Australia, and I showed him the dungeon, and the guys had these icons running along. Wow, we're doing something like, we're going to call it Windows. So our guys said, we're calling ours doors. So it's preceded Windows, I can assure you. We were all running run, stop, and whatever you did with BASIC. And so if that helps a bit of history, there were some really great one-liners from... I hope it helps you, but there's a bit of that. There's a lot of things happen to that, but let's take some questions rather than just trying to monologue.
The one thing I'll comment on, talking about the atmosphere within the factory, the whole company, really, that actually translated into the customers as well. Helped along by the magazines. Everyone wanted to get involved with Microbee because it was sort of an open architecture, if you like. It was very easy to add things on. Lots of programming tips in the magazines all the time, and plenty of projects to build and tack on and that sort of thing. So it really was this environment that was created that really helped the Microbee succeed and actually generated a lot of careers. A lot of people that were involved with Microbee in some way, or bought a Microbee and started learning to program. They went on to have very successful careers in IT and electronics and stuff like that. So, that atmosphere that was in the actual company, the way that it worked, the way that teams worked together, actually translated out into the rest of the community with magazines and customers in general. So,
my background, I did electrical engineering. Telecom had paved the way through uni. So my job, I then went through and I put the computers on at Qantas. First the IBM 360s. And I got so fed up because my resident engineer was gutless.
Right.
And you can imagine I was on IBM's critical path.
Yep.
So I was in Melbourne about every second week talking to the first assistant director general or something about that thing there. And I got so fed up.
Yep.
I just tossed it all in, but then IBM rang me the next day and offered me a consulting contract.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're then going to do ANSET, the same thing as Qantas, if you
Yep,
like.
yep.
That's how I got involved in it. And then I really had a sideline of Dick for years and that, so I started just buying bits in, and that'd be electronic mailbox,
Yep.
and then moving kits, and it moved up from there. And it wasn't me only, it was like an evolution was happening.
Yep.
You go to the magazines, it was just pure oxygen. Everyone knew everyone. The same in the US, there was no intellectual property. Everyone go to the same pub and talk about the hard drive they're going. You just go over there, it was a hope and slather.
Yeah.
So the evolution, the kit was so easy to predict.
Yeah.
It really, so that's how, I hope it made sense. So I started the electronic mailbox, and then I thought I'd just make money out of a letterbox, and I used to photocopy your order and send it back, your money back with every order or something. We'd have invoicing, we just used a photocopier and sent your stuff back with a bag of bits with apologies for what was missing,
Yeah.
And I really thought I'd better get serious, I had to get premises. So then it was 1975, I'd say, I registered Applied Technology.
Right.
Applying Technology for Human Needs, or whatever the tear-jerking story was. and that's how it came. And something then when we were overwhelmed when the Microbee succeeded.
Yep.
We had the New South Wales contract. I had a couple of other schools talking. Sweden out of the blue, because the guys knew, our Malcolm Mabel, the guys buying for us in Hong Kong, said it's no good me signing a contract, I'll talk to them. So suddenly Sweden was interested, and we're becoming number 2 in the Swedish school market.
Yep.
Just couldn't
That's crazy.
believe it. It was crazy. I went to Sweden and the in Skilder Bank, SE Bank, was the Wallenberg that saved so many of the Jews in World War II. The Wallenberg family of big bankers backing Saab, Volvo. We got a company called Incentives, which is venture capital. I sat down with one of the directors, and he gave me $1 million facility over lunch, and $500,000 was available when the plane landed in Sydney.
Wow.
So then I went to WA, and the Western Australian government had also picked us. But I said to Mel Bryce, the Deputy Premier, who by the way had personally had one as well as his office as part of the Education Department, I said, Mel, it looks what just happened. Banks in Australia are useless as tits on the boards, you know, but basically, one slip and I'm Swedish.
Yeah.
So he said, oh, well, I tell you what, I've got 3 other guys that are in town.
Yep.
Actually, they're financiers for Alan Bond. Pardon me if I'm going too far, but I'll fill you in. And I met, boy, who are top dogs? Yale, Harvard and Wharton were their MBAs. They'd worked round, they'd organised all the money for Swan Brewery. And the language now, I can tell you, that was, Mal, well, if you're paying for lunch, for God's sake, not a computer company, because he was trying to build an engine company and not a computer company. And the 3 came in and the one-liners were great. Oh, gee, these things, they print their own, you know, I mean, you Microbee and printed, they do Cabbage Patch dolls. You're just selling bloody toys. I wish I'd listened to Tara, look at the guys that made, but, so they came in and they said, oh, we can help you go public. I remember now, the guy who worked at Citibank said, yeah, if you're going to do a gunfight, get a gunslinger. So he had some one-liners, you know, that really helped. One of them was, certainly my management style, was, even though an MBA wasn't relevant, I think the faculty's not that interested in my path there. But he said to me, oh, God, you're bloody lucky. With your sort of luck, if you fell in a sewer, you come up with your pants pressed. Because I was 20 years about a sewage company, but basically, that's how it really happened.
Yeah.
Then they knew Alan Bond. We were in the upper echelon. We'd book in anywhere around Australia as Bond Corp. So we got the top rated up. When the company went public, we were oversubscribed. I didn't know what public was. I'd send checks back to Gary Adler. Just who's who of Australia. Money going back, because we only wanted 7 or 8, no, it was 10 million, might be a bit, but I think I had 30 million coming in checks.
Do you regret sending back those checks?
Have to, yeah, I said, hey, you could do it differently, but, and now, what very interesting was, of course, the America's Cup had just gone. So I was back in WA, and with Barry Lepley was one of the 3 venture capital guys, lives in Perth as well as London and New York. I think Porsche, I think I just had a Jag or something in Australia, but that's just, yeah, these live first class round the world regularly each month. And he and I, he said, oh, come on, we're going out to Rottnest, you know, and we went on this boat that I can't describe, you know, it was just, Alan Bond's thing that he bought was just a couple of metres longer than this, and it was a guy that owned it called Alf Barbagallo, I think his name was, which was the Rolls Jag dealer in WA. And Alf's one of your shareholders, but he managed to keep the boat. And so we just became a joke, you know. We had all this, no one worried really about the size. That's how we went public, and there was a lot of support. There was an airline strike, and I was with Lepley one time, and he was into a party, and that's when we met who's who of WA. They were sitting, as Bond was there, and I was sitting next to Eileen, his big bread, or whatever she was called at the time, and Dallas Dempster, and they're just who's who. And it was where the guy that owned Jeans West, actually, Alistair Nord, I think his name was, so, and Barry's introduced me to everyone in the bottom of the harbour scheme now. He's negotiated with them, he's done, he's doing. We went around to anyone, and behind his breath he's telling me how they're going with the bottom of the harbour thing. And I'll tell you what, they weren't second-hand VWs parked outside. Everyone owned everyone, so, but even in the middle of it all, Mrs. Bond said to me, we got shares in that. So Dal Holt, his own company, had bought quite a bit of Microbee stock. So we were getting past the point, if you like. But
it's fascinating.
It was fascinating because it was just way above what I'd ever. You see, in the US, you at least get coaching and things. I had no idea. These 3 guys were the only ones I knew. The banks, you know, stockbrokers just glaze over. I must tell you something now. I had a Microbee, and I could make stock prices on it back in 1985, don't forget, and we could book airline tickets and banking, so don't think it's that new. But I remember when the brokers called me together, we don't have insider trading. But we do have a rule here, no surprises. So I never understood the use of the English language that way around, I think, but there was a very interesting, it was just a joke. We weren't really the wrong way around, I didn't know what to do. Anyhow, that's probably an admission, I'm trying to give excuses, but so when it happened in Australia, you're cast out. In the US, you're just ready with your second and third floats and away you go. And possibly we should have gone overseas, but I was patriotic about Australia only, and I just wanted to do it here. It was more, it's worth it. It wasn't a matter of, and we had such pleasure. It'd been just sit down with the Swedes were dealing with us, and I had to cut short. We couldn't make enough computers, so we just handled Scandinavia, and of course then the Finns actually bartered them across the board to the Russians. So when I was taking the company public, I got a phone call. To go on the stock market, you got to write a prospectus, and we'd gone through, I think it was something like 60 drafts, or up to that. And my phone rings, oh look, would you like to come to Moscow? Pull the other leg, clunk, things like that. That's my typical mates, Suddenly, Department of Foreign Affairs rings me and says, there's a very serious request here, sir. Then I had to meet the guy from Asia, which was like something out of Monty Python. This guy with a limp and a beard and a cane. And well, first he rang and said, no, I'm not prepared to give my name. My secretary said, well, Mr. Hill doesn't take calls like that. And suddenly it was very discreet. So we met in the Greengate Hotel in Killara. So it was like something out of a circus. Yeah. And it was the briefing was, well, you're going to Moscow, so you've got to be very careful, don't get compromised. And that wasn't keep your hands off the local girls. It's a nice camera. So could I buy that off you? Or do this? We've told all the things you could get compromised. It was like theatrical. When I've been dealing with Rehabstev, a fellow in this, and they were professionals, and we had this amateur. So dealing with Moscow, don't forget we had Microbee also prepared all the visas. So if you went into Russia, we had Cyrillic keyboards, so they prepared the visas. So I had a second-hand black Mercedes. That was a 856 or whatever it was, I forget now, but had two fuel caps. I can tell that's about my motor knowledge. But and they quickly, could you go to Moscow to hurry? And I drove from Gosford in to Wallara. I mean, the CIO of ACMS was following me straight into the Russian consulate, pick up a ticket and go straight the next day into Moscow. So I'll give you another, pardon me if I'm waffling too much, but also Telstra, Telstra had a sense of humour always, and they were our mobile phones were the 007 ones, you remember? Yeah. And they weren't SIM cards, they were Microbee programming fusible link ROMs. So so I went to Moscow one of the many times, I think about 20 times, and I suddenly met the new Russian Trade Commissioner, Tikhonov or something his name was, a lovely guy we met in Moscow, shared a dinner and lunch together, whatever it was, and then he was coming to Australia, so his first appointment was our Microbee factory. He brings his wife out, who couldn't give a stand out. Don't want to see another bloody factory ever. Our guy spoke, he was American, he spoke German, and she had German too, so I left those two of them up at old Sydney town, and I took Tikhonov, sat in this black Merc, and I'm driving down the hill to the Gosford factory, and I got this bloody phone set between me, looking at it. And I said, we got them out here, but I think Brezhnev and what got them too. Do you want to make phone calls? I think you just, from a guy who's come where they're just renting printing presses, they're monitoring everything, but till I had a phone call, just pick up a phone in a car. So I've been around, I've seen the look on these people's faces, And anyhow, I digress a bit, but no, so taking it public, and that was more public, we got a lot of exposure. A few have asked, did you get government? Oh, bloody hell we did. Giving the contracts to us for schools.
Yeah. You got the New South Wales contract first.
Yep.
Did it go all around
No.
Australia? No.
Then I went to WA. Victoria I bid and they knocked us back. And yet I'd won a contract, I think in Iceland, so I had a great one line. I'm selling bloody Microbees the Eskimos and I can't sell them. In my own country. So we just went straight away and started calling the schools. So when the bid came up the next year, I had a list of 100 Victorian schools that already bought the Microbees, and then it really became universal. Yeah. And you've got to, if I'm being the fine line, is that the American would have, kids spell gasoline, whereas we took the Macquarie Dictionary first definition, which was the syllabus. So, when it spelled petrol and we had it, but by the way, there's slightly different English in each state. You're under state governments. So there's a little bit of the prescription, there's variation, but we had the Australian computers with Australian bits. I'm telling boys yesterday, we sold Microbees in Beersheba, the Rats and Brook and all that stuff. So because we had a Israeli Hebrew keyboard, and Harvey Cohen went over there and sold a few any of it, and they said, hey, you're the only ones with brains, because we had keyboards and a monitor. Some well-meaning Jewish family, obviously in New York, had just said a whole lot of Apple in English only, just keyboards. I made money, I donated to the Beersheba, what it was called in Hebrew, but basically we had complete monitors, keyboards. Just the difference was by then we welcomed the culture. We actually had, we had the keyboards from Denmark
Danish,
and Norway,
Finland,
were all different.
Sweden, all Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
So we had character ROMs for them. We had to get. I was working with the guys. I did over there to exchange, get the characters right so they appeared on the screen the way they were supposed to, and then get the keyboard layouts the way they were supposed to do.
So I think Apple just figured everyone speaks English and they better bloody well learn it. In Australia, we were humble guys matching the culture that countries were coming at. So, but again, this is my luck, avoiding falling in the sewer, but the Swedish had the name of the laboratory, but it did all of that. They did all the characters for us. It was we had a complete Hebrew keyboard going left to right, by the way. Did you see what
I don't remember seeing it.
Yeah. And then there was the Russian one, so they already had Russian keyboards. So I told them yesterday, but when I was finding my first visit, I went over, I met this academician and had a guy from the Schools Commission. He said, you're the second guy I met from the West this week. I said, who's the other one? Oh, that's Stephen Jobs. Arrogant young man. I haven't met him yet. But he said, you come over here with a guy from the School Commission, you're doing this, you've got school contracts. And we got on like house on fire straight away. And he turned to Jim and he said, well, how many teachers? And he said, we've got about 100,000, I think, in Australia. He said, well, I've got 3 million before I reach the first child. So you see the problems in education, and it's not the Russia we see to this moment, but it was a very decent people dealing realistically, and this was as a government looking seriously at it. I asked him once, well, how much would it cost if we make them here? And I'll tell you what, he was way ahead of me. They didn't have too many photocopies, but I got a carbon copy of a bill of materials in Russian. They'd already pulled a Microbee apart.
Oh, wow.
And he said to me, Mr. Hill, you're selling these to us at $200 or whatever dollars it is. This is going to cost me $17,000 US dollars each one. Wow. When you've got a tank factory and you're a bit busy making things to shoot, it's hard to make. So he said the cost of your computer compared to my costs.
Why would it cost so much every week?
They're unbelievably inefficient. And I'm going back 85s. By the way, they're pretty dumb too. If you ever look at these through, I'll also use ICs. It's easy with an 8-pin dip or something. You wait till you've got a 40-pin dip, and the Russians, we'd still leave it in inches, but the Russians had a metric one, so their bloody chips wouldn't fit. It's a little things you see, but we're at that level of confiding.
Well, back in the Cold War days, they couldn't just go and buy 808s from Z80s from Zilog or NIC. They had their own clones of the Z80s, but of course they had to reverse engineer them. They had to.
So we were lucky like that in that when I went, I checked with Canberra because I think it still existed over this thing called COCOM, which meant that the US restricted sales to China, Russia, anyone who was not one of their mates,
ITAR,
but the joke in my days was you can sell anything you like to Russia as long as it's clockwork, broken or useless. And suddenly I were in Canberra, and I got the US government gave me permission to sell the Microbee. It was a toy computer, so our government is highly respected because this COCOM thing was so serious. If I bought a Z80 chip from the US and we were on the blacklist, even though everyone in that dispatch department would be, the FBI would arrest them straight away. This is no questions asked, boom, out. So you had to have a clean list. So I went there, the Russians knew that. I said, you've also got COCOM released, they had a copy of the telex our government had sent them. So we've been blessed in what we're able to do. I tell you, that's the help that, by the way, when I was negotiating, actually I think it was Tchaikovsky's house, because they don't have offices, as you realise. It was Ilya Tchaikovsky's Strauss, or so. I'm sure it was his house. And he the negotiator guy just said, oh, come here, Mr. Hill, to me, because I'm IBM. So IBM was over there as well. So you don't think, but I hope it helps. But no, so Microbee is lucky for sure, but and they use them around. Yeah.
With so much potential sales in Russia, and why, and it might be a pointed question, but why did it not survive and grow to?
I think CPM. Well, then it was MS-DOS. IBM. They actually had the first PCs. So suddenly DOS became the anything. We had an 8-bit processor. We had to go and change all our software. This was a heroic attempt to position ourselves. Now we were selling Cabbage Patch dolls that were fun and to play with, and the market was far more serious. IBM came in, Big Blue, it was the business computer. I was telling everyone yesterday, but I lived over the road from a guy who's just recently moved again, but had a vineyard. And at that talk, we just in cellar doors grabbing a couple of bottles of wine, and we were talking, and it was when Dick Smith had invited us to a reunion. Oh, we're going to Dick Smith's tomorrow. Oh, I sold him his first computer. Well, yeah, I was IBM sales manager, sold Dick's his first. Oh, well, I was one better than that. I met Don Estridge in 1985, I think it was, when he released the XT. He announced it in Australia. It had a 10 megabyte, was it a kilobyte, 10 megabyte drive. And I said, so I've actually met him, Oh, I would have been there, Owen, because I was running IBM sales manager in the area or something. So it's funny how in 10 years neither of us had known each other, but that we'd been so.
But IBM and Apple were allowed to sell into Russia?
Yes.
Right.
The US government's fairly flexible.
Right. Okay.
I once had to go in to Stockholm and through to Russia. I went through San Francisco there, and I had to play bloody duty on the computer. It was funny, so I pulled out a $100 bill, so no, have you got anything smaller? Because we only got hopeless to the country. I'm leaving them through New York, it's mine. No, you've got to pay a duty or something. I had to scrape up some money to pay the duty and then flew out. Then went to Stockholm, and then I was strip searched coming out of Stockholm on the way to Moscow as I was selling my computer. it was paranoid, But so it was, it was the Russians. It was I always love getting passport stickers because they don't
do that.
You don't get them because somewhere in Syria is checking every very, very watching that side of the world, so you don't ever, the Russians never let you know your passport has got no marks on it where you are. The others, the IBM all had tape in those very early days, so we're not.
No, I do remember having tape games as a kid. I had an Amstrad, which you have the tapes.
Yes.
I remember all the noises from those. But
An interesting story from, and I remember this because I used to work in the engineering department, the two 3.5mm plugs that we used for the cassette were exactly the same size as the two power pins on the 240 volt plug, the figure 8 power plug. And it was some very ingenious New South Wales education students who found out that by getting those two 3.5mm plugs, plugging them into the power cord and then turning the power switch on, they can take the entire computer out and get a free and get a free period of school. And we actually ended up, and again, I don't know if you remember this, Owen, but we had to put these thumping great big 600 volt capacitors on the cassette line, so that if they did that, it wouldn't go through and blow the entire system up. But they used to be really, really small capacitors, and they were really, really big capacitors. Yep.
I remember a Microbee hooked up to a HF radio, and there was a dot matrix printer as well attached to it.
Yep.
And they used to decode synoptic charts from via radio fax